My name is Diane Miller. I'm 72 years old, and I live alone in an old house in Savannah, Georgia. My husband Thomas left too soon. Cancer, advanced stage. It was all too fast. Since then, I have raised my 3 children with my own hands, and with my heart even more. I was a mother, father, nurse, teacher, cook. I never said no to anyone in the family, never. But now, after everything I've given, I ask myself, how far does love go? When it only comes from one direction? Perhaps you, who are listening to me, have already felt this too. That little bit of doubt when you realize that you are always available, but never a priority. That bitter feeling of being useful, and that's it. To be remembered, yes, but only when they need something. That's that. Love without respect hurts more than loneliness, and I learned that the hard way. Today I'm going to tell you what happened to me on the eve of my youngest son's wedding. They thought I would accept it quietly, as always, but it only took one cross sentence for everything to change. By the end of this video, you'll understand why silence is sometimes the loudest response anyone can give. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. On the day my son got married, all the guests were there. The flowers, the children running, the groomsmen lined up. Only one thing was missing: me. And it was not due to forgetfulness nor due to illness. It was a choice that began with a phrase I heard through the kitchen window, said as if talking about an object. She will take care of the children. You don't even need to invite. She'll think she's helping. At that moment, I realized that my name had become synonymous with convenience. That the mommy Diane they always praised was only good as long as she was helpful and quiet. If this story has already started moving your heart, if you have experienced something similar or know someone who gave everything and, in the end, was treated as an employee of their own family, I ask you, leave your like here and subscribe to the channel. This is not just a video. It's an outburst. And when a woman like me decides to tell the truth, all she needs is someone on the other side listening from the heart. We will go together until the end, because there are things that we can only say once in a lifetime. I've always been one to do things with my hands, but with the heart first. When I'm sewing, for example, it seems that my soul is lighter. There's something about that line that goes in and out of the cloth that calms me down, like I'm holding time by the threads, sewing memories. I remember that in the weeks before Brian's wedding, I spent entire afternoons embroidering dish towels with the bride and groom's names. I turned 15, one for each closest guest couple. I chose floral fabrics and embroidered everything with gold thread. It was a pleasure to see. It was my way of saying, I'm here. I care. In the morning, the smell of cornbread took over the kitchen. That recipe was my grandmother's, from the time when women cooked with soul and not in a hurry. I tested every dish we would serve at the reception. I made notebooks with the ingredients, the costs, the Savannah suppliers who trusted me. I called each one, asked for samples, tasted everything with the greatest affection. I made sure it was perfect. It wasn't just a party. It was my youngest son's wedding. And perhaps the last time I would have the chance to do something great for someone. There was no bitterness in me. No. Just a beautiful desire to be useful. And, deep down, to be remembered. To be seen, of not being just the lady who solves everything, but the mother she loved so much, that everyone would insist on having her there as a guest of honor. The dress I planned to wear had been in storage for months. Navy blue, lacy on the shoulder, with a pearl necklace that belonged to my mother-in-law. I looked at him as if waiting for a hug, and I really did. The days passed, and the phone only rang for one thing: orders. Mom, can you confirm with the florist? Diane, have you thought about another follow-up? Mommy, can you get the godfather's clothes? No one asked how I was, if I needed help. I said yes to everything. Not because I expected retribution, but because love, when it is sincere, serves. But even love needs to be seen back, or it starts to hurt. There was an afternoon that caught me differently. I was organizing the personalized napkins, folding them with a warm iron to make them smooth. The house was quiet. The sun was beating down on the laundry room window and illuminating the dust in the air. And there, alone, with my hands burning from the steam, I felt a strange sadness. It wasn't anger. It was absence. An absence of myself. As if, little by little, I was disappearing, fading in silence in the midst of doing so much for others. And it was on that day that I asked myself, does anyone still see me as a person? Or am I just a resource? The one that solves, prepares, fixes. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever had the feeling that, because you do everything with so much love, people have forgotten that you feel it too? If you've experienced something similar, comment here with a short sentence. It can be an "I believe," or "it touched me," or even "I've lived it." Sometimes, reading what another woman felt is like finding a mirror. Still, at that time, I didn't drop the ball. I continued with my plans, testing sauces and reviewing quantities. I even made the souvenirs by hand. Glass jars with strawberry jam, with labels written by me, lovingly made by Diane. I felt like an invisible little ant, carrying everything on my back, waiting for someone to look at me tenderly on the big day and say, "Did you do all this? Thank you." But this thanks, he never came. And everything changed one Thursday afternoon, when I went to Brian's house to pick up some boxes. I entered the kitchen, as I always did, and heard voices outside, in the garden. And it was there, on the other side of the window, that I heard a phrase that I will not forget until my last day. Do you know what it was? You will find out in the next part. The phrase I heard there, standing in the kitchen with my hands still damp from the dishes, was like a needle entering slowly. "She will take care of the children. You don't even need to invite, she'll think she's helping." Tiffany said this laughing, outside, to her sister, Ashley. Laughing, as if I were part of the decoration, as if I was there just to be useful, silent, predictable. My heart took a step back at that moment. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the door. I stood there, looking at the dishes in the sink, listening to the laughter coming from the garden. And the more I listened, the more old things came back. The times I was called just to take care of my granddaughters. The messages that only arrived when it was an emergency. The "You're amazing, Mom," that always came before a proposal. I started to look back at all these months of preparations. And all of a sudden, it all started to fall into place in a painful way. Tiffany never asked me how I was doing. She never called me to sit down and dream with her about marriage. The conversations were dry, practical. "Diane, have you confirmed the time of the cake?" "Diane, did the florist answer you?" "Diane, are the souvenirs already packed?" Always a tone of obligation, never of affection. And Brian, my son, repeated that phrase that haunted me. "You're awesome, Mom." But he didn't come to help. I didn't know if I was tired, if I needed a lap, if my retirement was tight after I spent $3,000 at the buffet. In fact, I don't think he even asked how much I spent. He was just glad he had saved. And me? I thought I was being generous. When we love, we offer ourselves. But the problem is, when people stop seeing this offer as a gesture, and they start to see it as an obligation. One day, in a meeting with the wedding publicist, I accidentally heard a strange comment. I had my notebook on my lap, checking the details of the flowers, when she pulled the file from the computer and said, "These are the collaborators of the event." He pointed out the names. Photographer, decorator, DJ. And there it was written, Diane Miller, buffet, child support. My name, and the list of service providers. I didn't even know what to answer. I kept quiet, but my stomach churned. Child support? They didn't tell me anything. Nobody asked me. But there it was, as if I was part of the package. At another time, at a Sunday lunch, Tiffany made a joke that was in the air. Everyone was at the table, laughing, talking about the wedding, and she blurted out, "Diane's old energy will hold all the ends, right?" He laughed. Brian followed with an embarrassed smile. No one defended it. Not even a, "Hey, respect my mother." Just silence and laughter. I pretended I didn't hear. I took a platter and went to the kitchen. These little things, these small cuts, sometimes they hurt more than a slap, because they are bleeding slowly and no one sees. I tried not to give it importance. I tried to think that it was an exaggeration in my head. I convinced myself that this was normal. But when we start to force ourselves to swallow what hurts, it's because you already know there's something wrong. I didn't want to believe that my son, the boy I cradled in the early hours, who I defended when I was frail at school, who I helped to form, now saw in me a reliable maid, and that the woman he was going to marry didn't see me as family, but as free labor. But why did I continue? Why did I insist? Because I still had hope. I still thought that maybe on the big day, someone would look me in the eye and say, "You are the soul of this party. But that comment in the kitchen was the final line. And what I heard after that, what that sister said in response to Tiffany, it was what broke my heart for good. Want to know what she answered? You will understand why, after that afternoon, I was never the same. I remember that day as if the flour was still stuck in my hands. I was taking the last batch of potato breads out of the oven, that warm smell that always brought me peace, when I heard laughter coming from the back garden. At first, I thought it was just talk of people excited about marriage, but there was something in that laughter, something sharp, thin, kind of mocking, that made my heart take a step back. I put the baking sheet on the table, cleaned my hands on the apron, and went to the kitchen window, the same one that overlooks the arbor where I always planted my rose bushes. I stood behind the curtain, with no intention of snooping, but the sound called me like a warning. Tiffany was there, with her sister Ashley, who had just arrived from Chicago. Tiffany's voice, so sweet when it spoke to me, now came out light, loose, without any care, as if it could spill out into the garden without any consequence. I've already talked to Brian. His mother will take care of the children. All. You don't even need to ask. She won't even realize she's being used. She loves to help. When I heard the word used, my chest tightened. I felt as if something inside me had fallen from a very great height. Ashley laughed loudly, that laughter that cuts through the air. So while the old woman takes care of the brats, we dance and drink? Wow, that's perfect. The old man. Look, I thought that after so many years, after so much love given, no words could hurt me in this way. But it could, because it wasn't just the word. It was the intention. It was the place where they pushed me. It was the size they gave me. Tiffany laughed too, but her laughter had a hint of nastiness that I had never noticed before. Maybe I didn't want to notice. Maybe I was so busy trying to be a good mother-in-law that I blinded myself. She thinks she's a guest, Tiffany said, lowering her voice in a mockery that made me cringe. But it's really our free babysitter. It's going to be great. No one needs to run after children. It solves everything. I stood there, not breathing. I felt my legs soften, as if the whole world had lost its ground. I, who always did everything with so much desire to get it right. I, who dreamed of seeing my son smiling at the altar and preparing a dinner that would mark his life. I, who put my heart into every detail. Now I discovered that I was nothing more than a convenient labor force for them. A volunteer maid, an old woman who didn't get in the way because she was too busy serving. My hands began to tremble, first light, then strong. I held onto the window frame so I wouldn't fall. The smell of freshly baked loaves seemed distant, as if someone had closed the door of a lifetime behind me. I didn't feel angry at that moment. Not yet. What I felt was a deep pain, one of those that you can't scream about, the kind that we swallow. It was as if someone had ripped something from me that I didn't even know still existed. The hope of being truly loved by this new family. The hope that, after so many years of living alone, I would finally have a daughter. I retreated slowly, as if I didn't want to make noise in my own suffering. I walked to the sink, held on with both hands and stared at the still water, trying to understand where I got lost. I wondered if it had been when I accepted to help too much, when I said yes too soon, when I forgave too easily, or had I confused gratitude with affection? Perhaps he had confused obligation with love. I don't know. I only know that there, in that kitchen lit by the late afternoon, something died inside me, and something was born too. It was not revenge. It wasn't anger. It was awareness. Awareness of my value, and the lack he made in the eyes of others. And while I was still trying to breathe, Tiffany said one more sentence quietly, but not enough not to cross my chest. You don't even need to set aside a place for her at the main tables. She's going to be busy with the kids anyway. It was at that moment that I felt something breaking for good, because it wasn't just work. It was the place they gave me, or rather, the place they took from me. I went back to sitting at the table like a lady who aged 10 years in 10 seconds. I looked at the breads lined up, so golden, so beautiful, and asked myself, why am I doing all this if no one here sees me? And it was there, in this heavy silence, that another sentence began to form inside me, a phrase that would change everything. And do you know what was the thought that came up at that moment? The first, before any plan. You'll understand in the next part, when I tell you what happened after I closed that curtain, because it was at that moment that my life turned upside down. When I closed the curtain that afternoon, I felt as if I had closed a door inside me too. I didn't say anything. I didn't call anyone. I didn't bang pots. I didn't cry loudly. I just climbed the stairs slowly, one step at a time, as if carrying a weight that does not belong to the body, but to the heart. As soon as I entered my room, I locked the door, not because I was afraid of someone coming in, but because I needed, for the first time in a long time, to be with myself. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the room in silence. The blue bedspread, Thomas's old chair, the light smell of lavender. It all seemed so familiar, so mine, and at the same time I felt that I no longer belonged anywhere, as if the house was intact. But I was collapsing inside. I pulled out the photo album that sits on my bedside table. He's heavy, you know, not only for its size, but for what it carries. I opened to the first page. Brian still a baby, chubby, with that laugh so loose that it filled the whole room. Then, a photo of him on the first day of school. I remember the red backpack he wanted so much, and how he looked at me for courage. On another page, the two of us in Daytona Beach, our feet buried in the sand, the cold water hitting our ankles. That day he said to me, "Mom, when I grow up, I will take care of you as you take care of me." This phrase crossed me with such tenderness that I had to close the album for a moment. It's hard when you realize that the most beautiful promise you've ever heard has turned into just wind. But I couldn't feel angry. What I felt was an emptiness, one of those who throb, as if asking, "Why did you let them get so far?" I opened the album again. There was the Christmas I cooked for 20 people, alone, without complaining about anything. The Easter when I hid eggs in the backyard for the grandchildren, while the parents slept late. The birthday parties that I decorated myself. Because Mom does it better. I did everything. Everything. And it wasn't because I expected thanks. I did it because I liked to see their joy. I liked to feel part of it. But looking at those photos, I realized that, in many of them, I was standing, never sitting, always serving, always carrying something, always arranging everyone's life, except mine. And that hurt. It hurt like a deep twinge, one of those that make us breathe more slowly so as not to dismount. I stood there quietly, listening only to the ticking of the clock. I remembered a phrase that Thomas said to me shortly before he died. "Diane, no one values what is too constant." I never wanted to believe that. I always thought that love was precisely being constant, to be there, support. But that night, with Tiffany's cruel words echoing inside me, I understood what he meant. Maybe they had gotten too used to me, with my presence, with my silence, with my readiness. Maybe I had become so predictable that no one saw me as someone with feelings, with limits, with history, only as a resource. And the question that hurt me the most was, did my own son see me like that? I ran my hand through the photographs, one by one, as if caressing memories. But at the same time I felt a break, as if the love I have always given had been so great, so stretched, that it was now worn at the edges. When I closed the album, it was already dawn. I hadn't slept a second. The whole house seemed to hear my heavy breathing, and in that deep silence, a question appeared inside me for the first time. What if I don't go to the wedding? The question scared me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to think about it myself. Part of me wanted to believe that all I heard was a misunderstanding, that Tiffany was just nervous, that Ashley was just inconvenient. I wanted to believe that my son, the boy in the photos, would never allow me to be treated like that. But another part of me, the tired, wounded, invisible part, whispered, what if it is no mistake? What if they really think this is their place? And then came an even harsher thought. If I went to the wedding, I would be accepting all that. I would be confirming to them that they could use me without consequence. And that, for the first time, seemed unbearable to me. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. If you're listening to me, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, because there's still a lot of stuff stored in here that I've never told anyone. Sometimes we only find strength when someone on the other side decides to listen. That night, looking at the dark ceiling, I realized that deep down, I already knew the answer. The only doubt that remained was, would I have the courage to do what needed to be done? And it is precisely at the moment when this courage began to be born that history came full circle, because something happened the next morning, something that changed everything for good. The next morning, I woke up with a sensation I hadn't felt in a long time. Firmness. It wasn't calm. It wasn't peace. It was firmness. That kind of clarity that comes after you spend the whole night talking to your soul. I walked down the stairs slowly, still a little heavy from the night before, but with a determination that hadn't accompanied me in years. The kitchen was silent. The sun was beating down on the counter where there was still flour from the batch I had made the day before. It was strange. Something in me knew that this would be the last pasta I would make for someone without first being asked if I wanted it. I sat at the table, pulled out my old phone, one of those that vibrate before ringing, and looked up Margaret's number. Ah, a Margaret. More than 40 years of friendship, since when our children played on the same street in Atlanta. Retired literature teacher, a brave and sweet woman at the same time, one of those who see life through the details. When she answered, it was enough to hear the "Diane, did something happen?" for me to collapse. But I didn't cry. My voice just came out low, tired, as if I'd come too long. I told him everything. Every word I heard from Tiffany, every laugh from her sister, every bit of what I felt when I realized that my own name was being used as a synonym for practicality. On the other end of the line, Margaret was silent for a long time, and with it, silence never means disinterest. It means that she is choosing words that honor our pain. When she spoke, her voice came right. "Diane, they will have exactly the wedding they planned, but without you." That touched me like a snap. That was it. It was that simple. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to confront. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to get out of the equation, stay out, to withdraw. Because sometimes the absence of a person says more than any speech. "Come here," she continued. "We're going to spend the weekend at Lake Oconee. I pay for the room. You just need to come. You just need to breathe." Suddenly, I realized that it had been years since someone had offered me something without asking for anything in return, and that's what made me accept it. Not the invitation, but the gesture. Humanity. For the first time in a long time, I packed a suitcase that wasn't meant to help anyone. I put 2 changes of clothes, my medicines, a light jacket, and a notebook that I had kept since Thomas's death. I never wrote anything there, maybe because I never had the courage to record what I felt. But that morning I felt like I could finally put something of my own on paper. Before leaving, I went to the fridge. There were the printed spreadsheets, the buffet lists, the menus with neat handwriting, the recipes written down by hand with the care of those who try to offer love in the simplest and most generous format that exists. Food. I put my hand on the paper as if saying goodbye to an old version of itself. Then I picked up the phone and started canceling everything. I called the chicken supplier. "Mrs. Miller? But everything is reserved for Saturday." "I know, dear, but plans have changed." I called the flower shop. "Oh, Diane, the flowers have already arrived. Do you really want to cancel?" "Yes, I do. Save them for another bride." I called table and cutlery service. To the bakery. For towel rental. Each call was like dropping a weight, like pulling out a nail that I had put in my chest. As for the souvenirs, those little candy boxes with pale blue bow that I made by hand for weeks, I kept them in a cardboard box and put them in the closet. Maybe one day I'll use it, maybe never, but at that moment, I needed to take everything that carried the name of the wedding off the table. My home felt lighter as I undid each appointment. More mine. Quieter. And in the middle of that silence, I sat down at the table and pulled out the empty notebook. The cover was a little worn, but it was pretty. Navy blue, with gold lines. I wrote very slowly, almost afraid of the words, "Dear Brian," but I soon blacked out. No, that letter was not for my boy son, the one in the photos on the first pages of the album. It was for the man he became. I rewrote, Brian. Simple, direct. Then I let the hand go on its own. I didn't write in anger. I didn't write to humiliate. I wrote with serenity. I wanted him to understand that I loved him, but that no love obliges a mother to accept being treated as a servant. I told him that I heard the conversation. I told him how I felt. I told him that I would not be at the wedding, and I wished the day was beautiful anyway. When I was done, I closed the notebook carefully. It was strange. It seemed that as I wrote, something inside me had lined up, like I've put my life back in the right place. I set the table, grabbed my suitcase, and walked to the door. Before leaving, I looked for the last time at the kitchen where I heard Tiffany and Ashley's laughter. And I thought to myself, it's over. But I still didn't imagine that what would come next. It would be even more surprising. Because as I closed the gate and breathed in that morning air, a question began to grow inside me. Have they realized that plans are about to fall apart? I started that Thursday like someone walking on a frozen lake. Each step seemed light, but it carried an old weight. A weight that I had been holding onto for years without realizing it. I woke up before sunrise, sat on the edge of the bed, and stayed there for a few minutes, listening to the silence of the house. A silence that, for the first time, did not hurt me. It was a silence that announced change. After breakfast, I grabbed my little blue notebook and my list of suppliers. One by one, I went through the pages with my fingertips, as if I were saying goodbye to something that no longer belonged to me. I first called the meat supplier, there in Pooler. I explained that I needed to cancel everything because of a health emergency. The girl even tried to insist, to ask if it was not possible to keep at least the chicken seasoned, but my voice was firm, almost strange even to me. No, honey, I need to cancel everything. I wrote down the protocol number, thanked him, and hung up. Then came the Savannah Flower Shop, the little shop on Habersham Street, where I had picked out the blue hydrangeas to match the Tiffany dress. The attendant seemed surprised, but didn't question much. Can I refund the amount in credit or refund? Reimbursement. I wanted every penny back. Not for the money, but for the dignity. Then I called the artisan bakery that would make the cornbreads, the same ones my husband Thomas always praised. And although I loved that smell, that taste, that symbol of the South, I needed to cancel. It hurt a little, but it was necessary. Each cancellation took a weight off my chest and put another back in place, a weight of freedom. At the supermarket where I had ordered almost 100 pounds of ingredients, I had to go in person. They already knew me by name. When I explained that I needed to undo everything, an employee offered me help to carry the boxes back to the warehouse. I thanked him, of course, but I stood there watching the lists being crossed out, one by one, as if erasing the illusion I had created myself. And the most curious thing is that even though they crossed everything out, no one asked, "And you, Diane, are you okay?" It was always about the request, never about me. The stationery store came soon after. The centerpieces were almost ready, folded with that affection that only artisans have. I had left a payment in advance, and now I asked for a refund. The owner looked at me with gentle eyes. "Are you sure, Mrs. Miller?" Had, more than ever. I left there with the money in my purse and a strange feeling in my chest, a mixture of relief and sadness. And it was while walking to the car that I found myself thinking, sometimes the one we love the most is the one who gets used to what we offer. They get so used to it that they don't even notice when we start to disappear. And that phrase kept hammering at me as I drove back home, with the Savannah sky tinging the late morning. Maybe that's why I want you to stay with me until the end, because only when life starts to take away our certainties does it show who we really are. And my dear, what was yet to come in that story would change everything. When I got home, I found 2 messages from Brian. Sweet, affectionate messages, thanking him for the effort, saying he couldn't wait to see the buffet ready. He wrote, "Mom, you are amazing. Tiffany sent you a heart." And soon after, the emoji itself appeared on the screen. I looked at that little red figure with a calmness that I didn't expect. It was almost ironic. They were relaxed, calm, confident that I was there, holding everything, as I always did. I just replied, "All right." And it was. All right. Just not in the way they imagined. I spent the whole morning organizing the house. Not out of necessity, but because every tidy corner gave me back a piece of me. I saved the towels I had washed for the wedding. I rewound the bows of the souvenirs and put everything inside a large box, at the bottom of the wardrobe. With each object I took from the dinner table, it seemed that I also took away a misplaced expectation, an obligation that was never mine. It was like cleaning an old wound. When the clock struck 3 in the afternoon, I sat on the porch with a mint tea and looked at the empty street. The wind shook the trees, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed without pain in my chest. Nobody suspected anything. None of them imagined that on Saturday, on the day of the big wedding, there would be no buffet, there would be no flowers, there would be no souvenirs. There would not be that mother always ready, always firm, always useful. I would be absent. And absence has a weight that no presence can imitate. But as I breathed in that air of freedom, a thought began to grow inside me like a stubborn whisper. Will they realize before it's too late? Or did life still have a painful revelation in store for me? Something I still hadn't imagined. On Friday morning, Savannah seemed more alive than ever, as if the whole town was breathing the same festive air that precedes a big event. I, however, walked through my house with such a deep calm that even the creaking of the wooden floor sounded different. Under my feet, I opened my suitcase on the bed, carefully folded my coral dress, the one my husband, Thomas, said brightened my face, and layered it over the simple clothes I'd set aside for the weekend. As I packed up my belongings, I looked around the room and felt like I was leaving behind not a home but a tired version of myself, one that for years accepted more than it should, that mistook silence for kindness and availability for love. Outside, I heard cars passing by, probably families going to see the mansion near Forsyth Park, where the wedding would be held. I saw, on my cell phone, Tiffany posting stories with that impeccable smile, showing the arch of flowers being assembled, writing, "Tomorrow is the day." Little did she know that the flowers would not have a buffet to go with it, and that the heart of that event would collapse even before the first toast. I took a deep breath, closed my suitcase, and went downstairs with the feeling that each step was a farewell. Margaret arrived punctually, as she has always done for the past 40 years of friendship. She just looked at me, put her hand on mine, and said, "Are you sure of that?" And I, without hesitation, replied, "For the first time in my life, I am." We got in the car and headed towards the Lake Oconee resort. The road seemed longer than usual, perhaps because, for the first time, I was not going to serve anyone, but to serve myself as a rest, respect, peace. On the way, I said little. I preferred to watch the trees, the fields, the distant houses, feeling that the landscape welcomed me in a way that no one in the family had done for a long time. With each kilometer, I left behind an old obligation, and it was there, in the middle of the road, that I felt a twinge in my chest, a mixture of sadness and liberation, and I thought, it's curious how sometimes we need to disappear so that they can finally see us. If you've ever felt this feeling of being seen only when it's missing, comment here with a "it's true" or "I understand you," because this pain is not only mine. It is from many people who loved too much and were listened to too little. We arrived at the resort in the middle of the afternoon. The lake was calm, reflecting a golden sky that looked like it was hand-painted. I checked in almost silently, as if fearing that any noise will interrupt a newborn courage. The room was simple and beautiful, with a balcony that overlooked the water. As soon as I found myself alone, I sat down at the table, opened my navy blue notebook, and began to write the letter. It was not an explosive letter, nor a vindictive one. It was clear. She was honest. It was the first time I had explained myself to myself before explaining myself to the world. I wrote that I heard everything, that the buffet was canceled, that he would not be at the wedding, and that she would no longer accept being treated as a domestic piece fitted into anyone's convenience. I folded the letter carefully, put it in an envelope, and went to the house of my neighbor, Mrs. Taylor, a kind lady who knew my story since I moved into the neighborhood. I asked her to deliver the letter at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, a time when, for sure, Tiffany and Brian would already be panicking about the absence of food and the free babysitter. Mrs. Taylor took my hand and said, "It was time, Diane." I returned to the resort with one less weight in my heart. The sun was already setting when I sat on the porch, looking at the reflection of the light on the lake. Margaret came to me with 2 cups of tea and stood there in silence, just existing by my side. Sometimes, the greatest proof of love is precisely this: to stay without invading, without demanding, without asking for anything. As we watched the horizon, I felt something change inside me, as if one door had finally closed, but another was about to open. And it was in this calm that a question began to hammer slowly, like a warning, a timid announcement of what was yet to come. Will they read that letter with humility, or would the real chaos only begin when the clock struck 10 in the morning? On Saturday morning, I woke up even before the alarm clock rang, with that good feeling of fresh sheets and fresh air coming through the window of the resort. The lake was so calm that it seemed to hold its breath with me, as if the whole world was suspended by a thread of silence. As I put on my bathrobe and combed my hair slowly, I thought about how, if it were any other year of my life, I would already be in the kitchen since 5 in the morning, chopping vegetables, seasoning meats, coordinating schedules, worrying about the smallest details so that everything would turn out perfect for others. But that day, I belonged only to me. Margaret knocked on the door with 2 steaming cups of hibiscus tea and said with that quiet smile, "Today you're going to forget there's a telephone, Diane." I just smiled, and I obeyed. I gave myself to massage at the spa as someone who surrenders his body to the arms of rest after a lifetime of holding others. The masseuse's hands ran over my tired back, and I felt an old knot unravel, a knot that I might have carried since the first time I put the others above me. Outside, the sun was beginning to shine brightly, reflecting off the lake like small stars trembling in the water. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let my body sink into the stretcher, smelling the soft smell of lavender. I didn't know exactly what was happening in the city at that moment, but I could imagine it, or maybe feel. Because at 9 a.m, when I turned aside for the masseuse to take care of my shoulders, somewhere in Savannah, my son Brian's phone was already ringing nonstop. I imagined the confusion, the buffet that didn't arrive, the employees of the place calling him, asking for me, for the food, for the schedule, florists looking for the centerpieces that would never be delivered, and Tiffany probably pacing back and forth, with that sweet rehearsed way, quickly turning to despair when she realized that nothing was the way she had planned, or rather, the way she had assumed I would do for her. Meanwhile, the children were arriving, one after the other, with their crumpled clothes and infinite energy. 15 small hurricanes circling the hall, with no one to coordinate them. I could almost see the scene. A boy running, bumping into a decorated table, knocking over one of the fake cakes, another hidden behind chairs, angry parents wanting to know where was the person responsible for the children they had supposedly promised. And me? I was there, lying down, feeling the gentle touch of the masseuse on my feet, almost laughing alone at the silent irony of the universe. Because deep down, it wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about dignity, about saying enough in a way that doesn't hurt anyone, but that finally preserves us. After the massage, I sat with Margaret by the lake, sipping our tea slowly, while a light breeze passed between us. She looked at me and said, "I haven't seen your eyes so quiet since before Thomas left." And that moved me, because it was true. Because for the first time, I was letting the chaos happen away from me, not inside me. My phone was turned off in my bag, but I knew that at that very moment, Brian must be collapsing. Tiffany must have been crying, maybe even screaming, asking where I was. And then, at 10 o'clock in the morning, at the exact time I agreed, Mrs. Taylor, my neighbor, would deliver the letter. I decided to rest. I canceled everything. Good luck. With love, but with dignity, Diane. I wonder how quiet the room must have been when they read this. The scare, unbelief, the breaking of a habit that I myself helped to create, that of always being available, always ready, always helpful. I leaned back in the iron chair on the resort's deck, closed my eyes, and let the sun warm my face. It was as if my body was saying, "This is what you needed, Diane." That was the case many years ago. And yet, as the lake shimmered before me, an insistent question began to spring up in the back of my mind, a whisper that brought not fear, but expectation. What will Brian say when he finally manages to reach me? And more, will he recognize me, now that for the first time I'm choosing myself? When the massage was over, and I was sitting in front of the lake again, with the sun touching the surface of the water, as if writing lines of light, I felt my whole body relax in a way I no longer knew existed. Meanwhile, a few miles away, my son Brian lived the absolute opposite of my calm. Later I would find out, from the confused accounts, the desperate messages, the trembling voices, that by 10:30 a.m., he had his phone in one hand and cold sweat running down the other. He had opened the letter. I had read my name signed firmly, and for the first time since he learned to walk, he realized that I would not come to save him. I was told later that he tried to call the buffet, but they all repeated the same thing. It was Mrs. Diane who canceled. She called the florists, who said she came in person to cancel. She tried to talk to the stationery store, who replied she asked for a refund and collected the order. It was as if, for the first time in his life, the world was unwilling to protect him from a simple truth. His mother had made a choice. Tiffany, I was told, oscillated between crying uncontrollably and blaming everyone else for a disaster that only she and her sister had started. She sabotaged me. She did it on purpose, she screamed, as 14 of the 15 children raced through the historic house near Forsyth Park, like unattended little hurricanes. The 15th child, they say, was crying near the photo booth because someone had stepped on her dress. And if you've lived long enough, you know that collective lack of control has a smell, a sound, a vibration of its own. And in that big house, on that hot Georgia afternoon, every murmur echoed like an accusation. Some relatives began to leave. Others complained about the lack of food, and not just the lack of food, but the lack of respect. Aunt Linda, who came from Florida, remarked too loudly that this would never have happened if they had hired professional people instead of exploiting their own mother. I heard this phrase later, repeated by 3 different people, each putting their spice into the story. But the truth, my truth, was only one. I was no longer there to sustain a world that did not sustain me back. In the midst of all this confusion, the point came up that really started to crack. Ashley, Tiffany's sister, the same one who laughed calling me the old woman, let slip to a cousin that maybe Diane overheard the conversation in the backyard. That maybe was enough. A maybe can turn into an earthquake, the cousin told her mother. The mother told an uncle. The uncle confronted Tiffany herself, and when the rumor reached the ears of the entire family, the mood of the marriage changed. It was no longer just a poorly organized event. It was a story of ingratitude being revealed little by little, like dark paint poured over white towels. I can almost imagine Brian, standing in the middle of the room, letter in hand, feeling for the first time that he had no control over anything. He's not a bad man. He never was. But in that moment, he faced his own flaw, the failure to have gotten used to my yes, of having accepted my sacrifices as if they were natural, of never having asked myself if I was happy to offer, or if I just didn't know how to refuse anymore. And while all of this was going on, as the cake fell, the flowers withered, and the guests became impatient, I stood on the deck of the resort, watching a small boat glide over the water. There was such a deep peace inside me, and at the same time, a twinge of melancholy. It's strange how, even when we do what's right for us, there's always a little grief, a mourning for what we could have been if they had loved us more carefully. And it was there, holding my cup of tea, that I thought, will my son ever understand that this was not abandonment, but defense? If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think, because sometimes telling these things is the only way we can breathe. As the sun began to slowly descend on the horizon, I noticed that the lake was golden, almost liquid with light. It was too beautiful for such a chaotic day outside, but a slight restlessness began to pulsate inside me, as if the wind carried a warning that I still couldn't decipher. And right there, between the silence of the resort and the tumult of Savannah, a question formed inside me, slow and heavy. What would Brian do when he finally managed to talk to me and find out that this new Diane wouldn't be going back? I spent the whole morning walking slowly along the shores of Lake Oconee, feeling the damp grass under my shoes and listening to the light sound of the water hitting the rocks, as if the lake was breathing along with me. It was funny. I had lived 72 years, raised 3 children, lost a husband, worked until my bones ached, and yet, as I walked along the narrow, tree-lined path, I realized a truth that flashed through me like a silent thunderbolt. This was the first day of my life that was truly mine. It was nobody else's. It was for no one else. It was mine, and mine alone. I stopped near a wooden bench, sat down, and let the wind stir my gray hair, bringing the soft smell of earth, of pine trees, in a light morning. It was then that I felt, for the first time, not only peace, but space, a space inside me that has never existed before. And as I took a deep breath, I wondered what must have been happening in Savannah, in that historic house where everything was ready, except the essentials, my absence. What I never knew how to express in words when I was younger, I now understood. Sometimes a woman's greatest cry is her silence. My absence was not revenge. It was a border, a limit, an answer. Brian, I imagined, must have been pacing back and forth, trying to sort everything out, while the clock ticked against him. For the first time, feeling guilt, not as a distant possibility, but as a real weight on my back. Tiffany, surrounded by looks and expectations, felt in her skin what she had always tried to hide under the perfect pose. That respect is not bought, not demanded, not acted. Respect is built, and she hadn't built anything with me, just used it. And the most curious, it's just that I didn't even need to raise my voice for this to be evident. I learned later that one of the guests, a cousin on her family's side, asked aloud, "What do you mean you put the groom's mother to take care of 15 children without paying anything? This is not a guest role." And it was there, at that moment, that the first crack appeared in Tiffany's impeccable nail polish. Shame. A shame that came not only from the mistake, but from the fact that everyone was seeing the mistake at the same time. There in my refuge, in the middle of my hike, I stopped for a moment and touched the water with my fingertips. The surface rippled slowly, as if responding to my touch. And I thought, how many times, in my entire life, have I been still water, too calm, too silent, allowing anyone to throw stones without complaining? There, looking at my distorted reflection, I realized that the lake did to me what I did to the world. I absorbed everything. But that day I discovered something that you may understand well. Even the quietest water forms waves when someone crosses the limit. And that's why I want you to stay with me until the end of this story. Because believe me, the most memorable moment has not yet happened. The part where life reveals itself in a way that we never forget. Stay here with me, because what comes after this silence will show a lot about who I've always been, and about who I had to learn to be. I spent the end of the morning sitting in the shade of a huge tree, watching 2 ducks swim slowly. As I sipped my tea and hugged the hot cup between my hands, I thought about how, for years, I gave my all to my families, my chores, my children, and I realized that I had never stopped to ask myself what I wanted, what Diane wanted. And there, in that simple resort, on that Saturday that was expected to be the most exhausting of my life, I was resting as if I had dropped a 50-year burden on the ground, without shouting, without justifying myself. At the same time, my absence created such a void in Savannah that no one could fill it. Guests murmured, children ran. The flowers were assembled, but the main table was empty. And Tiffany was beginning to understand, deep in her soul, that there is no makeup that hides in gratitude. Such silence weighs heavily. Such silence teaches. And that silence was just beginning to work in favor of my dignity. And as I watched the lake sparkle in the sun, a question slowly began to grow inside me, almost shy, almost restless. When the phone finally rings, will I be ready to attend? Or can what will come in Brian's voice still hurt me in a way I don't expect? I imagine that hall in Savannah as if I were there myself, even though I was miles away, sitting by a tranquil lake as the truth ran between the wedding tables like a silent fire. It is said that it all started with a whisper near the bar. The groom's mother was used. Then came another. They planned to hide the old lady with the children, can you believe it? And as always happens when the truth finds room to breathe, it has grown too fast to be contained. The children's parents were outraged, demanding to know why no one had hired a proper team, why they had promised that there would be a responsible person, and now everyone was there, desperate, with dirty dresses, children running, fallen cake, and no adult prepared to deal with it. It was then that Tiffany's father, Richard, a strict man who was well respected in Chicago, known for being discreet and upright, heard the rumors. They say he walked up to his daughter with his face closed, with that kind of authority that doesn't need to raise his voice to be felt. He asked simply, "Is that true?" And if there was a slim chance that Tiffany would deny it, it evaporated when Ashley, pressed by looks, comments, and her own conscience, let the truth slip away. A truth that I heard through the walls of my kitchen. A truth that they never imagined would return to them in such a public way. Yes. We planned for her to take care of the children. It was to make everything easier for us. When Ashley finished speaking, the silence around them seemed louder than any music playing in the room. Richard put his hand to his face, as if trying to process not only a mistake, but the character revealed by his own gestures. He walked away slowly, saying nothing more, and that hurt Tiffany more than any scolding. The humiliation was no longer private. It was no longer whispered between sisters. She was there, wide open in front of witnesses, Some shocked, others revolted, others just confirming what they already suspected about her treatment of her family. And Brian, my son, I wasn't there to see it, but I know his shoulders when they bend. I know the way he squints when guilt really comes. Not the superficial guilt we feel just because someone accuses us, but the guilt that springs from the deep recognition that we have failed someone who has never failed us. I was told that he stood in the center of the room, holding the letter I wrote, reading and rereading, as if he were looking for a softer, more willing version of me, the one that always saved him. But the letter had only the truth, a truth he avoided for years. He always assumed I would be there, always, even without asking if I wanted to, even without thanking me, even without realizing that I was also tired, that I felt it too. Meanwhile, at the resort, I was walking along the trail that skirted the lake, and suddenly, without warning, I was seized by a memory so clear that I had to stop. I remembered when Brian was only 8 years old and fell off his bike. He cried, thinking he had broken his arm. I held him in my lap, swayed slowly, and said, "Mommy's here, even when you don't see me." And there, so many years later, that phrase came back to me as an inverted echo. Because at that wedding, on that day, it was precisely my absence that was teaching him a lesson that my presence could never teach. Funny how some memories mark us with a force that time can't erase, isn't it? If you have any memory in your heart that came back with force listening to this part of my story, shares in the comments. It can be something small, a detail, a gesture. Sometimes these are the memories that sustain us when the world hurts too much. Back in the hall, the confusion increased. It was no longer about food or organization. It was about character, about respect, about shame. Tiffany cringed in front of the guests when she heard someone say, "How could she treat the groom's mother like that?" And from then on, no one could defend Tiffany anymore. No one else could defend Brian. Because what they did wasn't just a lack of planning, it was a lack of humanity. And for the first time, they realized that I wasn't the available old woman they imagined, that I had networks, that I had value, that I had limits. And as the truth spread, I wondered, how would my son react when he finally managed to reach me, when his voice crossed the distance between chaos and my peace? Because as much as he was suffering at that moment, something told me that the most difficult request was yet to come, and that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't prepared to listen to him, prepared to. I returned to Savannah late Sunday afternoon, as the sun began to fall behind the trees and left that golden glow in the windows of the houses, as if everything was too calm to match what I knew awaited me. I opened the door to my living room, and the first sound I heard was the continuous beeping of the phone, full of messages. The cell phone also flashed nonstop inside the bag. I didn't touch anything. I just looked at the device as if looking at a door that he still doesn't want to cross. I left it all there, vibrating and begging for attention, as I hung up my suitcase, took off my coat, and breathed in the air of my own home, an air that felt lighter than before. I went straight to the kitchen. I washed my hands, turned on a soft light above the sink, and started to tidy up my plants, removing dry leaves, moving small pots, watering carefully. My gestures were serene, measured, almost ceremonial. Every leaf I touched was like a way to remind myself that no matter how hard the world tried to tear me away from me, I still knew how to come home. I spent the day like this, in silence. A silence that was not empty. It was not escape. It was choice. When night fell, I sat in the armchair by the window and stood there, listening to the wind blowing on the trees and the ticking of the old clock that belonged to Thomas. My heart was calm, maybe tired, but calm. Then, around 9 o'clock at night, someone knocked on the door. It was not a hesitant touch, but a heavy, urgent, almost distressed touch. I got up slowly, straightened my hair, and when I opened it, there was Brian, my son, the boy I carried in my arms, now with his face downcast, a lost look, and his clothes crumpled as if he had spent days inside one. He muttered, "Mom, please, can I come in?" I nodded with a short gesture. I opened the door, but I didn't open my chest. He entered slowly, looking at every corner of the house as if looking for some sign of how to talk to me. I remained standing, with my hands crossed, not out of coldness, but to protect the part of me that still throbbed. He took a deep breath, ran his hand over his face, and when he finally looked up, I saw something there that I had not seen for many years. Shame. The real one. He tried to start with the practical explanation, but his voice failed. Then he tried to justify it, and his voice broke again, until it simply collapsed. Mom, I blew it. I sat slowly in the chair at the table, and he sat down facing me. But I didn't offer him coffee, or touch his arm, or say those old words that had saved him so many times. I just stood there, steadfast, waiting for him to say what needed to be born of him, not of me. He cried. He cried as he had not cried since he was a boy. He spoke of the confusion, the disaster, the public shame, Tiffany's father moving away, the out-of-control children, the guests leaving, his name being whispered as synonymous with ingratitude. And when the true confession finally came, it came low, almost mute. I never realized, Mother, how much I hurt you. I never realized how much I left you alone. I just thought you were fine. I always thought you'd be there. I listened to him, in absolute silence. I didn't interrupt. I didn't save it. I didn't soften. I let every word find its place, and the pain that accompanied it. When he finished, he put his hands to his face and stood there, breathing as if trying to pick up pieces. I waited a few seconds, letting the silence rest between us, and then spoke, short but firm. Brian, love without respect is not love. It's habit, and habit doesn't sustain anyone. He looked up at me with an almost childlike shock. I continued, You've gotten used to me. With my effort, with my presence, with my availability. But he didn't get used to the idea that I'm a person. I shouldn't have allowed it for so long. But I did. And now, the end has come. He swallowed. Mom, I'm not that man. Yes, I replied calmly. But it may not be. The silence that settled between us was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of the mirror. He saw himself, for the first time, and that weight fell on him hard. We stayed there for long minutes, just breathing. He wiped his face with his shirt sleeve, trying to compose himself, and muttered, I want to fix everything, Mom. Tell me what I do. And it was precisely there, in this request, that I felt a sudden restlessness walking through my chest, like a presentiment. Because as sincere as I was, I knew that fixing it wouldn't be simple, not even fast, nor perhaps possible altogether. And as he waited for my answer, with the most vulnerable gaze I've seen on him since I was a child, a question began to form inside me, a silent warning that the conversation that would come after that, it wouldn't be easy for any of us, because the hardest truth had not yet been told, and someone very important was still missing knocking on that door. I remember exactly the moment when I felt something inside me change its place, as if an old piece which for decades had been misaligned had finally found its fit. Brian was sitting in front of me, his eyes red and his hands shaking, repeating that he wanted to fix everything. But I knew, deep down, that there was no possible fix without a rupture first. A clean, firm, necessary rupture. I took a deep breath, rested both hands on the table, and said with a calmness I didn't even know I had, Brian, first of all, you need to understand that I can't go back to being the woman you were used to treating as an extension of your life, that Diane is no more. He widened his eyes, as if I had just lifted the ground from under his feet. And I did. I continued, looking straight at him, not harshly, but truthfully. If you want to rebuild something with me, you're going to have to learn to see me as a person, not as a resource, not as an extra hand, not as a babysitter, cook, or solution to all the problems you don't want to solve. He tried to speak, but I raised my hand slowly. For the first time in my life, I interrupted him. No, now you're going to hear me. And it was at that moment that I realized the extent of my change. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't hesitating. He was firm, whole. Never again, I continued, never again put myself in a position to serve without being invited, consulted, and respected. Never again expect from me what you would not have the courage to ask a paid stranger to do. And I will never again accept humiliations disguised as favor, not even yours, nor Tiffany, nor of anyone. I saw his face crumble, as if my every word dismantled a brick of the crooked construction where he always placed me. I explained politely, but without backing down. If I am invited to an event, I will be treated as a guest. If you want something from me, ask me. Don't assume. And if you ever put me in a position of servitude again, I will step aside. No ticket, no letter, no return. Because love without respect, Brian, love without respect becomes a habit. and habit becomes abuse. He ran his hands through his hair, desperate. "Mom, I swear. I'm going to change, I promise." I nodded slowly. Promises are easy. Words are cheap. What I need to see now is action, non-declaration. He sobbed softly. I think for the first time he understood that I wasn't punishing him. I was choosing myself. And that, for him, was new, painful, but necessary. "I'm not leaving you, Brian," I added, my voice softer. "I'm just finding myself. And if you want to walk with me after that, you're going to have to learn to be a part of my life in a new way. A way that doesn't exhaust me, that it doesn't erase me." He nodded, slowly, like someone who finally understands that he was living with the infantilized version of a mother who no longer exists. After a few minutes, she got up from the table, wiped her tears, and said, "Mom, I'm going to prove to you that I can be different." I just replied, "We'll see." There was no irony, no threat, only truth. A truth that protected me for the first time in years. When he left, the house was silent again, but this time, the silence was not loneliness. It was space. It was breathing. It was freedom starting to take root within me. But as I closed the door, I felt a strange shiver running down my back, as if something was yet to come. Because even though Brian had reached out to me, there was one person who had not yet faced the weight of his own cruelty. A person who, in a way, had started all this wound. And I knew, sooner or later, she would also show up at my door. I could tell that Tiffany's downfall began the moment the letter was found there on my kitchen table. But in fact, it started much earlier. It started the moment she chose to see me as a tool, and tools, when they break, remind the whole world of how much they were needed, and how badly they were used. In the days following the wedding, word spread through Savannah faster than any market gossip. The groom's mother was treated as a nanny. The mother-in-law was responsible for 15 children without being consulted. The bride called the groom's mother an old woman. What was once spoken only between four walls now echoed in entire corridors, message groups, entire outraged families. I, there in my corner, observed everything with the serenity of someone who knows that he did not need to raise his voice for the truth to appear. Truth, when it is too big, finds its own legs. Tiffany, poor thing, collapsed. That neat smile she sported in all her Instagram photos disappeared. Her father, Richard, a highly respected man from Chicago, asked for explanations in a conversation that Brian says made everyone in the room pale. And it wasn't just a request for an explanation. It was a rug pull. "Did you do that to your husband's mother? The woman who welcomed you into her house? Does that seem fair to you?" His voice, deep, controlled, left Tiffany trembling. And when Ashley, cornered by shame, admitted that I had heard it all, the father simply got up and left the room without looking back. That man, who had always treated her like a princess, now only saw a woman who had behaved like someone without a heart. Her friends also didn't know how to defend her. Some simply stopped responding to messages. Others were more direct. "Tiff, that was mean," and each word of these entered her like a thorn that I didn't need to plant. Brian. Brian. He was also no longer the complacent husband who let her ironies pass. He saw everything with the clarity that only humiliation allows. And when she realized that she had laughed at me, made fun of my love, used my name as an excuse for exploitation, he walked away. Not physically, but emotionally. And this distancing, for Tiffany, hurt more than any public criticism, because she didn't expect to lose her husband, but she lost a piece of him in that ruined marriage. And now I tell you something that may sound strange. I didn't feel any pleasure watching all this happen. None. I didn't vibrate. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victory. I felt mourning. I grieved to realize that such a young girl chose the path of arrogance instead of respect. I grieved to see my son wake up to a wedding that wasn't as healthy as he imagined. I grieved to remember how much I opened my heart to her. It's okay to feel that. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. So if you've been here with me so far, enjoy this video and subscribe, because there's still a lot I need to share, and maybe these words will find someone who needs them as much as I needed to hear myself. Tiffany was locked in their room for days, crying, hidden from everything and everyone, and between sobs and silence, reality began to impose itself with force. She didn't fall because of me. She fell under her own weight. Because of the weight of the words he said, thinking that no one would listen. By the weight of the laughter he gave at my expense. By the weight of cruelty that he believed to be cleverness. Later that week, Brian told me that she finally admitted, "I treated your mother like a resource, not as a human being." And this phrase, spoken over the phone, echoed inside me for hours, because it was the raw, naked, painful truth. The mask had fallen, not because I pulled, but because I had never been properly secured. And it's curious, as she stared at her own broken reflection, I, here, felt something unexpected sprout. Not joy, not revenge, but a kind of firm peace, as if I had regained a piece of myself that had been lost for years. And at the same time, a question began to slowly draw inside me. A question that accompanied me for the rest of that night. After all this, how would the first meeting between me and Tiffany take place? What would it be like to look into the face of the woman who laughed at me, now that she was finally down and without masks? I remember the day I heard the doorbell ring as if someone was knocking straight on my chest. It was a calm afternoon, the light coming in through the living room window in a meek way, one of those that make everything quieter than usual. And when I opened the door, there was Tiffany, without the impeccable makeup, without the perfect bun, without the rehearsed smile. It was another woman. The swollen eyes, the trembling hands, the stooped posture. It was as if the weight of her own conscience had finally fallen on her shoulders. "Diane, can I come in?" The voice came out small, almost girlish. I took a step back, allowing entry, but kept my heart in the same place, attentive, steadfast, stripped of illusions. We sat in the living room, she on the sofa, I in my armchair, the same one I've had for so many years, and that has seen me go through joys, losses, old ages, and rebirths. Tiffany took a deep breath, as if she were about to dive into very cold water, and then it began. "I need to tell you everything, the whole truth. Not what I said to Brian, not what I tried to make it look like at the wedding, but the truth of who I was." She spoke with a tremor that didn't match the woman I had known at the beginning, the one always in control, always superior, always so self-possessed. There, she was superior to nothing. It was just a person trying to pick up the pieces of his own soul. She told me about her mother, who died when she was only 14. She said that she never managed to fit this grief inside her chest, that she grew up trying to hide any weakness so as not to disappoint anyone. She said that her stepmother never saw her as a daughter, who spent her adolescence being told she was too good to be like her mother, but never good enough to be a real daughter. I listened in silence because there was a pain there that I recognized. Not because I lived the same, but because I have seen many women lose their roots and try to grow supported by the air. When I met you, Diane, I felt something strange. You were everything I never had, and at the same time you scared me. You knew how to cook. You knew how to welcome. You knew how to teach. You had a calmness that I didn't know, and instead of admiring it, I was afraid. Fear of getting attached and losing again. Fear of looking small. Fear of not being enough. She wiped her face with her hands, not caring about looking frail. And to hide that fear, I started to diminish you, to use you, laughing at things you did with so much love. I was jealous of you, Diane. Envy of your strength, the way Brian loves you, of how everyone sees you as a safe haven. I could have interrupted. I could have said that envy does not justify disrespect, that no fear gives license for humiliation. But I stood there, listening. Because sometimes, listening is already more difficult than speaking. And I've learned over the years that when someone finally chooses to strip their soul, silence can be the greatest proof of respect. She continued, "I said those things thinking you'd never hear. And if I had, I imagined that you would be sad or perhaps angry, but you would continue to help, as you always did. I never imagined you'd walk away. I never imagined that you would have the strength to simply, to leave." Her voice cracked. "You're gone." And in the end, I was the one who collapsed. In the midst of that entire confession, I felt something born inside of me. Not anger, not pity, something more complex. I even mumbled, almost without realizing it. It's curious how sometimes respect only springs up when we finally learn to say no. And I say this to you who are listening to me, because there is still a lot of this story that I have not revealed, and I confess that there are moments that only make sense when told together, step by step. Tiffany held my hands, something she had never done. I'm not here to ask for everything to go back to normal, not even to ask you for forgiveness today. I know that forgiveness is construction, not command. I just want to let you know that I see you now, that I understood what you're worth, and I understood what I did. She raised her eyes, red and sincere. And whatever you decide from now on, I'll respect it. I looked at her with the serenity that only age gives, that calm that comes not from weakness, but from conscience. Tiffany, forgiveness does not come on the same day as the request. Forgiveness is like slow fermented bread. It needs time, air, and truth. I can't give you today what doesn't exist yet. She nodded slowly. But I can recognize one thing. It takes courage to come here and admit all this. Courage to face the consequences. That's it. I respect that. A tender silence has settled between us. Not the silence of embarrassment, but the silence of one who is finally understanding the place where he steps. It was a beginning, not of friendship perhaps, but of humanity. She got up slowly, straightened her blouse and said, "Thank you for listening to me. Whatever the path from now on, I'll take it." I walked her to the door. The sun was beating down weakly outside, illuminating her face in an almost symbolic way, the light showing cracks that had never been exposed. When she walked through the gate and turned the corner, I stood there, holding the handle, taking a deep breath, feeling the echo of everything he had just heard. And it was at that moment that a thought crossed my mind like a whisper. Sometimes life doesn't give us simple choices. It gives us true choices. And I knew that sooner or later, another conversation was about to happen. And the question that remained there, throbbing in my chest, was only one. What would happen when Brian came to me again, now knowing the whole truth, not just the part that suited him? I usually say that real change in a family doesn't happen in an apology, but in the small gestures that come later, day after day, when no one is looking. And that's how I realized that something had really turned inside my son and Tiffany. There was no announcement, no grandiose moment, no embellished promises. There was silence, and within that silence, respect. The first sign came in a simple way. A message from Brian on a Tuesday morning asking if I would like to have lunch with him on Saturday. It wasn't a request for help. It wasn't a problem. It wasn't an urgency. It was an invitation. An invitation from those who want to be present, not from those who need you to solve something. I answered yes, but I felt a kind of warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. On Saturday, he arrived with flowers, simple flowers, from the market, but chosen by him, not for convenience. "Mom, I don't want to talk about anything that happened. I just want to hear from you. Tell me what you've been up to." And I, after so long being accessed only for utility, almost found that question strange. I told them about my garden, the rose bushes that were blooming early, the cornbread I had tested with a new recipe, my plans to organize the old photos. And he listened. She listened as if she knew she wasted too much time thinking she would have a mother forever, without realizing that love tires when it is always demanded and never reciprocated. Then came Tiffany. I confess, I didn't expect her change to be profound, but she surprised me. The first time she texted me, it was written like this: "Diane, I'd like to see you when you feel comfortable, not to talk about the past, but to learn from you, and I understand if you don't want to." That was no longer the same woman who laughed at me on the balcony. She arrived at my house with short steps, without makeup, holding a Southern cookbook she had bought especially for me. "I wanted to cook with you one day, if you want." And look, I didn't say yes right away. I learned, at this stage of my life, that yes is a precious word. He just said, "Let's see, Tiffany. Things need to breathe before they grow." And she nodded, without pressuring, without begging, without dramatizing. He just accepted. As the weeks passed, something beautiful began to happen. They started to consult me about everything, not because they needed to, but because they wanted to include me. "Diane, do you think it's better for us to bring families together for Thanksgiving or make a meal more intimate?" "Mom, would you rather have dinner at a restaurant or would you rather have us cook for you?" "Diane, are you comfortable with that?" Even Tiffany, who used to use me without thinking, now looked me in the eye before suggesting anything. She started therapy and gradually reconciled with her father as well. The change in her was visible. Less artificial sparkle in her eyes, more truth in words. They were not rehearsed lines. It was consciousness. It was humility. And perhaps, remorse transformed into maturity. During this time, I also needed to watch myself, because it is too easy, after a fall, to assume the position of martyr. I didn't want that. I just wanted respect. So I set my boundaries gently but firmly. If they invited me to dinner, I went only when I really wanted to, not out of obligation. If he asked me to help with something, I would reply, "Not this weekend. I'm going to rest." Or, "That's not up to me. You can solve it." And no one complained. Nobody was pressuring. No one played the victim. It was as if, finally, my voice had been returned. The same voice that has always existed, but that they were too deaf to hear. It's curious how, after a lifetime of being the backdrop, when we finally occupy our own place, the world around us needs to reorganize itself. Brian came to visit me often, but now he came empty-handed. No orders, no emergencies. He came just to sit on the couch, drink coffee, and talk about life. And there is no greater gift for an elderly mother than to see her own child return to her not out of necessity, but out of affection. Tiffany began to act more discreetly. He asked, consulted, pondered. He sat with me on the porch from time to time, not to ask for something, but to listen to stories. "Diane, how did you meet Thomas? Diane, what recipe from your mother was your favorite?" It was as if she was, in fact, trying to build something new, not to erase the past, but to respect it. And I, who have lived long enough to know that true change does not make noise, perceived every gesture, every retreat, every sincere attempt. My home, which once echoed loneliness, began to take on a different movement, not invasive, not demanding, but respectful. They came when invited. They called before showing up. They asked if I wanted to participate in the decisions. And for the first time in many years, I felt view, not as labor, not as free emotional support, not as family decoration, seen as Diane, the woman, the mother, the person. And while all this was happening, a strange feeling began to grow inside me, as if something new was about to be born in the midst of everything that collapsed, a kind of new beginning that I didn't even know I wanted. Because, as beautiful as it would have been to see all this change, there was an even bigger and more delicate conversation waiting to happen. A conversation that could define the rest of our history, and she was about to arrive. Anyway, when a family gets back together, what happens when the first big request comes up? I remember that late afternoon as if the world had stopped just so I could breathe a little slower. The porch of my house in Savannah had always been my refuge, but on that day, it seemed like another place. The air was lighter, the sky more open, and the sun hid behind the trees as if closing a curtain after a very long show. I sat in my rocking chair, the one that creaks only when the wind changes, and let my body rest there, whole, with no part asking permission to exist. For the first time in many years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. While the sky took on that orange hue that only the southern United States knows how to give, I began to review my own life inside my head, like someone who runs his fingers through a rosary of memories. I thought about the years when I gave my all without ever expecting anything in return. I thought about the nights when I sewed clothes, prepared cakes, helped with school chores, always thinking that love was synonymous with service. I saw myself there, younger, always with a ready smile, even when fatigue burned in the bones. And I realized that for a good part of my life, I had convinced myself that this was how a mother should be, tireless, available, silent. But in that wedding, or rather, in that collapse disguised as an elegant party, I realized something much bigger. It wasn't the food that was missing. It wasn't the flowers that disappeared. It wasn't the children running and knocking over cakes that made everything collapse. What fell that day was an illusion, the illusion that love survives alone, without respect, the illusion that I would always be remembered only for what I offered, and never for what I was. The illusion that my heart could be used without anyone noticing the wear and tear. When that letter of mine was read, when people started asking, "Where is Diane?" When my name stopped being synonymous with convenience to become synonymous with lack, there I understood that the silence they ignored was precisely what sustained everything. And now that silence was no longer a prison, it was freedom. I looked at my aging hands, scarred by years of work, and for the first time, I felt no guilt for letting them rest. The house was quiet, not because I was alone, but because I had space again. It was a stillness that didn't hurt. He calmed down, a kind of peace that doesn't come when life spares you, but when you finally develop the courage to choose yourself. And I chose myself. I felt it so clear inside me that even my chest seemed to open a little more to fit that new sensation. The world had not diminished. I was the one who had grown up. It was no longer the mother who accepted anything just to maintain harmony, nor did the mother-in-law who swallowed undone to avoid conflicts. I was Diane Miller, a woman who lived, loved, lost, started over, and who finally learned to say no, not out of revenge, but out of dignity. There, watching the sun slowly disappear, a soft certainty came to me. I didn't lose anything in that wedding. I gained back who I was, and more. I won the chance to rebuild my family in a fairer, more honest, more humane way. Each limit I set made room for them to really see me, so that Brian, my dear son, would remember that I am not eternal, and that we need to take care of those who have always taken care of us. So that Tiffany could discover that respect is not born from appearance, but from character. And for me to find out that my value was never in the flowers, nor in the buffets, nor in the favors done in silence. My value has always been in me, and as the wind slowly lifted the curtain of the room, I felt a feeling deep in my chest, of those who arrive like a whisper. Something was coming, something important, as if life, after giving me back my voice, was about to give me another revelation. And I stood there, swaying in my new silence, asking myself, what still needs to happen before this story finally finds its outcome? Today, when I think about everything I experienced, I go back to that night on the balcony where the sun said goodbye behind the trees as if to tell me that a cycle had finally found its end. After everything, the crumbling marriage, Brian's tears, Tiffany's downfall, the tough talks, and the slow rebuilding, I understood that I wasn't the one who broke up the family. It was I who saved myself from a fate that, if I had not had the courage, would have erased me little by little. And the most beautiful thing is to realize that, when a woman chooses herself, the world around her needs to relearn how to deal with her. And they learned. Today, Brian visits me unhurriedly, without requests, just to sit next to me and enjoy the silence. Tiffany, with a humility I never imagined she would see, remains firm in therapy, rebuilding her relationship with her father and, little by little, rebuilding a relationship with me as well. A relationship that is no longer born of fear or arrogance, but of recognition. The whole family understood that I am not labor. I am not a party accessory. I am not the last item on the to-do list. I'm Diane, whole woman, free woman. And if there was a day when they treated me as if I were invisible, today they know that my silence is what sustains the respect inside that house. Time, which has been cruel to me so many times, today walks by my side as an ally. He showed me that love is not about sacrificing until there is nothing left. Love is about being seen, being heard, being respected. I learned that dignity is not begged for, it is affirmed. And when we finally say it, something inside us rises so strongly that no one can diminish it again. And the lesson I take from all this may be for you too. Never allow your kindness to be confused with obligation. Never let love become a bargaining chip. We are not born to be resources. He is born to be a person. And when we understand this, life fits back into our own hands. Today, at the age of 73, I wake up every morning with a peace that I didn't know. I make my coffee, water my plants, walk through my kitchen as the owner of my space, and above all, the owner of myself. I no longer carry guilt that is not mine, nor obligations that do not belong to me. My name is no longer used as an excuse for abuse. My name is just Diane, and that, now, is enough. Thank you for staying with me so far, for listening to this story that was so heavy to live and so liberating to tell. There are things that we only understand when we say it out loud, and feel you here on the other side accompanying me. This heats up more than you think. If this story touched your heart, leave a like. It comes to me as a silent hug, one of those that we feel deep in our chest. If you want to stay with me, subscribe to the channel. It's like inviting me to the next coffee, so we can continue talking calmly, like two friends sitting on the balcony. Also, tell me in the comments which city you're watching. I love to know where each heart listens to me from. It even seems that we sew a whole map of company and affection. And if you can, Activate the bell. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. And before you go, let me tell you something. Don't go yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.